everybody, this is Craig Tanner for the Mindful Eye and the Daily Critique. This is part 2 of a 2-part Daily Critique. To get the most out of this video, you'll want to go back and watch part 1 if you're just joining us today for the first time, because I'm just going to jump right in where I left off. We're looking at this image that was created by G, who's a beginning photographer from Illinois. This is where we were in our work. I'd blurred the background. When I get to here, one of the things that I'd love to change about this image is this dark area. I've blurred these shapes back here now so they don't have quite as much weight. Now, from just a value and weight standpoint, I feel like this area of the image is doing two things, or working against the feeling that I'm going for. One, it's blocking the implied energy of the way the bride is looking, but then there's something else to me that's even more basic when it comes to design. G has cropped this image from the left and right. She's moved towards more of a square. One of the really neat things about square is it supports very simple, direct placement of a main subject. We can take the main subject and put it right in the middle like G has done here, because the framing device being symmetrical really supports that. What a lot of people don't understand about design is that subject placement, if we're talking about something as basic as rule of thirds or golden mean, it's relative to the ratio of the framing device. So that in a square frame, symmetrical frame, we can't leverage because we don't have any one side that's further away or longer than another, and centering is actually congruent with the symmetrical frame itself, putting things right in the middle. I love the bride's eye being centered here, or cropping to this feeling within the square. And when I look at this image, there's something else that is almost happening that also goes along with the symmetry of the square. On the left to right diagonal, you've got the hair clasp here, and then you've got the hands and the eye in the middle. So you have this sense of real nice balance on the major left to bottom right diagonal. On the other diagonal, you've got the ear here, you've got this really nice rhyming curve of the hair. But then when we move up to this corner, we have this blank negative space. If this idea was rotated around so that it was pushing down like this, it would rhyme these circles and it would balance, and all four corners in effect would be pinned out, and there would be a feeling of symmetry with everything moving through, the implication of movement moving through the eye in the center. I didn't take the time to chop this and rotate it. Another way that we could lessen the value of this is lower the contrast of this implied shape by just lightening it, and I've done that here with a couple of curves layers. And then after that, I came in, tried to add a little bit more weight to the hands down here by adding to the low end. I used the levels adjustment and applied that locally. Here's the before, and here is the after. And then I did to this image what I do to the vast majority of images that I work on in the darkroom. I darkened the corners and the edges to contain the eye. I did some vignetting. Here's the before, and here is the after. This is so far where we started, and then this work so far has been in the service of a couple of things. This idea of the dreamy feeling being very important to the main subject of the picture, and then looking specifically at the first three questions that were about maximizing the dreamy feel, dealing with a high contrast spot on the forehead, and the color cast on the face. I went to black and white to sort of deal with all of those issues. G's last question is a fascinating question. If you remember from the first part of the video, G said that this shot essentially was an accident. Most of the shots in this series, the focus was on the bride and the hand was out of focus, but she ends up choosing this because the main subject is essentially out of focus and the hand is sharp, and this was an accident. So this is a question. G says, how do I capture these feelings intentionally and not just by accident? So I got to answer this in a super practical, almost too straightforward way, and I could say that one of the things that we can see is that when things are out of focus, that they do become abstract, and it does have the potential to create a feeling of something that is more ethereal or more dreamlike. So one of the things that we could do is do exactly what G has done here. We could shoot with a lens that is very, very fast, that has the potential to express shallow depth of field, and we could consciously make an effort to, when we're shooting portraits, shoot the portrait in a variety of ways in terms of where we place the focus. If this was the hands of the bride in front of her, we could intentionally get very close to the hand and focus on that and let the face go completely out of focus in the background. And in fact, that is a technique that I use quite a bit when I'm shooting portraits. I'll abstract the face of the person and bring the hands in as the main subject. So on a practical level, we could just intentionally play around with where we're placing focus. And if we practice with our camera and we're very technically adept at focusing quick to places and reframing, so on and so forth, then even in the context of something like being a wedding photographer, we could shoot this quick in a variety of ways where we had these choices for depth of field. But I almost get the sense, I don't know, but I almost get the sense from G's backstory that she's saying that she didn't even mean to do this. And that's a completely different kind of thing. So let's talk about that, and we could still hopefully talk about it in a practical way. There are a lot of things that can keep us from being more creative, and one of them, oddly enough, is our desire to get better at what we're doing. It's natural for us, if we really love something, to want to learn the foundation of it and then practice it and become better and better. Another way that we could say this is more competent, or we could say more knowledgeable. But the very competency, the very knowledge that we're going for, the very improvement that we're going for can at some point, or at a lot of points along the way, it can become a huge closed door to us becoming more creative. Because clearly, if we get to the point where we're competent all the time and we're intentionally making things in a certain way, then the accidents, the mistakes, and accidents and mistakes are a huge source of creativity. We don't have to look very, very long at all into the world of invention or the world of medicine or the world of art to think about all these stories that we've been told in our lives about the mistakes that led to the incredible aha moment or the discovery. For us to be in that position, we have to be out on the edge of what we know. We have to be willing to fail. We have to be willing a lot of times to fail when it actually means something. So, one of the things that we could do today, moving into the weekend, we could look at G's beautiful image here and use her amazing question as just a source of permission to go out this weekend. Pick something that you're really afraid of in terms of a scenario, being a photographer, and move right in there and take some pictures. If you're afraid of it and it's been a limit in the past, you will not have been there before. And when we move into these new areas, then our mistakes clearly will go through the roof. That is part of being a beginner. But one neat thing about making the mistake now that you have some competency is that you can make a mistake and you can look at the mistake and a lot of times have a lot better understanding of what caused the mistake, or have a greater appreciation for the image. And if you're willing to put your ego down and accept this as a gift when you're shooting in a scenario or situation, new piece of equipment or whatever, where you don't know what you're doing, then you can have intentionally set yourself up to fail so that you will surprise yourself and that you will move forward. I can tell you from teaching the Next Step workshop, this can be a really, really difficult leap to make because we spend so much time protecting ourselves from the kind of discomfort that can happen when we go back into being a beginner. I just really want to encourage you to move into these new areas. One of the things that I say over and over again on my Next Step workshop is that we can reframe this discomfort of being a beginner, sort of being incompetent, and we can say, you know what, I understand that whenever I have a breakthrough, I know that I always have to go through this door of discomfort. Instead of calling it uncomfortable, I could start to recognize this as the state of heightened awareness that always happens to me right before I have a breakthrough. Really beautiful, dreamy image. Just love what's happened here with shallow depth of field, and even in the color file I really love what's happening with extraordinary color. I want to say a big thank you to G for sharing it with us. I want to say a big thank you to you for being here. Hope to see you again very soon on the Mindful Eye and the Daily Critique. Have a great weekend, everybody.